For years, Crimea has been at the center of global controversy, a region claimed, controlled, and contested in the tug-of-war between Russia and Ukraine. What began in 2014 with Russia's annexation has now become an unsustainable burden on the local population, drawing international condemnation, sanctions, and the constant threat of escalating military conflict. But what makes this moment unique is that the people of Crimea themselves, once thought to be passive or resigned to Moscow's grip, are rising to a point where they simply cannot take it anymore. The phrase, "justice has been done," reverberates because what is unfolding isn't just a clash of armies or governments. It is the awakening of a population that has been caught in the crossfire of geopolitics for too long. The introduction of a no-fly zone has dramatically changed the equation, restricting Russia's ability to dominate the skies and striking at the heart of Moscow's military supremacy in the region. Life under annexation. For nearly a decade, ordinary Crimeans have lived under heavy surveillance, propaganda, and limited freedoms. Moscow's initial promise of prosperity and protection quickly faded as sanctions from the West crippled economic opportunities. Basic services became unreliable, foreign investment evaporated, and the younger generation began to see their dreams shrink before their eyes. The Russian government sought to compensate with infrastructure projects, bridges, pipelines, and symbolic gestures of integration, but they could not hide the stark reality: Crimea was becoming more isolated, not more connected. Shops emptied of international goods, tourism dwindled, and even the promise of security rang hollow as the region increasingly became a frontline zone. Rising resistance. As Ukraine's counter-offensives gained momentum and Western support increased, a ripple of change spread across Crimea. Underground networks began circulating news outside Kremlin-controlled media. Families whispered about a future where Crimea might return to Ukraine, or at the very least, break free from Moscow's suffocating grasp. The so-called silent majority started becoming more vocal. Protests, though dangerous, sprang up in small, symbolic acts: graffiti on walls, refusal to cooperate with Russian authorities, and the courageous documentation of abuses. This groundswell of resistance, once fragmented, began to coalesce into a collective voice demanding change. The no-fly zone is a turning point. The establishment of a no-fly zone was a seismic shift. Suddenly, Russian jets, helicopters, and surveillance drones, once a constant presence, were restricted, neutralized, or forced to retreat. This not only reduced Moscow's control but also emboldened the local population. The skies that had symbolized oppression were now open, contested, and no longer exclusively Russian. For the people of Crimea, this wasn't just a military tactic. It was a psychological liberation. The fear of bombardment lessened, and the morale of resistance groups soared. The phrase, "justice has been done," began circulating not as propaganda, but as an expression of genuine relief. International impact. Globally, the move sent shockwaves. NATO nations framed the no-fly zone as a defensive measure to protect civilians, while Russia condemned it as an act of aggression. Yet for many observers, the reality was clear: Russia's aura of invincibility had been punctured, and Crimea was no longer the compliant stronghold Moscow had hoped it would remain. At the United Nations, heated debates erupted. Western leaders argued that the Crimean people had endured enough, and that their collective voice must be heard. Meanwhile, Russia doubled down, threatening retaliation but finding its threats increasingly hollow as internal dissent and battlefield losses mounted. Part 2. A region on the edge of transformation. The human cost of defiance. Behind every headline about military zones and geopolitical shifts lies the human cost. Crimean families have endured years of hardship: soldiers patrolling streets, the fear of speaking freely, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. With the no-fly zone in effect, these families now glimpse the possibility of change, but also brace for Moscow's inevitable response. Mothers who once feared their sons being conscripted into Russia's war machine now find strength in the thought that international eyes are finally protecting them. Students who longed to study abroad but were trapped by sanctions are daring to dream again. Pensioners, who once remembered a different Crimea before annexation, feel their sacrifices may not have been in vain. Moscow's dilemma. For Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, Crimea was supposed to be the crown jewel, a demonstration of Russian resurgence. Losing influence there would be more than a military setback; it would be a symbolic unraveling of the very narrative used to justify Russia's aggressive policies. But the Kremlin faces a dilemma: escalate and risk catastrophic losses, or withdraw and admit defeat. Neither option is palatable, Yet the growing defiance of Crimeans and the implementation of the no-fly zone leave Russia with fewer choices each day. The role of Ukraine. For Ukraine, Crimea has always been more than a territory, it is a matter of identity, sovereignty, and justice. President Volodymyr Zelensky and his government have consistently vowed to reclaim every inch of occupied land, and the growing resistance inside Crimea bolsters their case on the world stage. Ukraine has leveraged this momentum, not just militarily but diplomatically. By highlighting the voices of Crimeans themselves, Kyiv frames the struggle not as conquest, but as liberation. This narrative resonates powerfully across Europe and beyond, reinforcing the idea that what's unfolding in Crimea is not just a battle for land, but a battle for justice. International stakes. The crisis in Crimea has now transcended borders. For NATO, the no-fly zone is both a humanitarian mission and a test of credibility. For the European Union, it's a matter of regional stability and energy security. For the United States, it underscores the broader contest between democracy and authoritarianism in the 21st century. Countries like Turkey, balancing ties with both Moscow and Kyiv, find themselves recalibrating policies as the tide turns in Crimea. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens worldwide, watching the images of Crimean protests and Russian withdrawals, recognize the larger message: authoritarian control is never permanent when the will of the people rises. A glimpse into the future. The phrase, "justice has been done," suggests a resolution, but in truth, Crimea stands on the edge of transformation rather than finality. The path forward remains uncertain. Will Crimea reintegrate with Ukraine peacefully, or will Russia unleash one last attempt to cling to control? Will the no-fly zone hold, or will it spark a broader confrontation between nuclear powers? What is clear is that the people of Crimea are no longer passive observers. They are active participants in shaping their destiny. Their courage, resilience, and refusal to endure further exploitation have shifted the balance in a way that weapons alone could not. The broader lesson. Crimea's unfolding drama offers a universal lesson: when people unite against oppression, even the mightiest regimes can falter. The Kremlin may have tanks, warplanes, and propaganda machines, but it cannot extinguish the human spirit's hunger for freedom. For the world, this is not just about maps and borders. It is about affirming that justice, though delayed, will eventually prevail. The no-fly zone is more than a strategic move, it is a symbol of protection, dignity, and hope. And as Crimeans raise their voices louder than ever, the echo is heard not only in Moscow and Kyiv, but across the entire globe. Final word. Justice has been done in Crimea, not in the sense that every problem has been solved, but because the people themselves have reclaimed their agency. They are no longer silent, no longer subdued, and no longer willing to live under Moscow's shadow. The no-fly zone has tipped the scales, proving that international solidarity can provide real protection. But more importantly, it has emboldened a population that the Kremlin once assumed would remain docile. Crimea today is not simply a contested territory, it is a living testament to the resilience of human will. Whatever comes next, one fact remains undeniable: the people of Crimea can no longer be ignored, and their cry for freedom has become the rallying call of a new era.